The afternoon sun streamed into my kitchen, illuminating the very grocery bags Emma was dissecting with a frown. "Mom," she began, her voice tight. $100 for groceries. What on earth did you buy?" I felt my cheeks flush. It was one thing to offer helpful suggestions, quite another to scrutinize my spending like I was a child. "Just the usual," I replied, trying to keep my voice even. "Some fresh produce, a bit of meat for the week, a few treats." Em lifted an eyebrow, pulling out a small container of imported mango slices. "Treats like these are ridiculously expensive. Mom, you could have gotten perfectly good mangoes at the regular grocery store." I held back a sigh. Julian, Emma's fiancé, hovered nearby, a faintly amused smirk playing on his lips. It stung more than I cared to admit. "They were on sale," I offered weakly, knowing it sounded flimsy. Emma simply pursed her lips and continued her inventory, listing every item and its perceived extravagance. "This artisanal cheese, Mom, really, and salmon. That's a luxury, not a staple." Julian chuckled, patting Emma's shoulder. "Your mom has expensive tastes, doesn't she?" He said it lightly, but the underlying condescension was clear. I busied myself unpacking the remaining groceries, my hands trembling slightly. "I like to enjoy myself," I said quietly, placing a jar of gourmet olives on the counter. "There's nothing wrong with that." Em exchanged a look with Julian. "Of course not, Mom," she said, her tone laced with a patronizing sweetness. "But you have to be careful. Things are different now. We need to make sure your money lasts." The "we" hung in the air, a small but significant pronoun that grated on my nerves. Ever since my husband, their father, passed away a few months ago, Emma and my son Michael had taken it upon themselves to oversee my finances, convinced I couldn't manage on my own. They'd started small, suggesting budget-friendly meals and offering to pay bills. Now, it seemed, they were escalating, policing my grocery shopping and questioning every purchase. "I appreciate your concern," I said, forcing a smile, "but I assure you, I can manage my own finances." Emma gave me a look that said she didn't believe me. "We just want to help, Mom. Dad would have wanted us to make sure you were taken care of." The mention of my late husband was a low blow. He had trusted me implicitly, never once questioned my judgment, especially when it came to finances. He'd also left me well provided for, a fact my children seemed determined to ignore. They believed I was living on a modest pension and savings, unaware of the substantial investments he'd made over the years, investments that had grown considerably under my careful management. "I know you do," I replied, my voice softer now, a hint of steel beneath the surface. "But I'm still perfectly capable of making my own decisions. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to put these groceries away." They lingered for a moment, clearly unconvinced, before finally leaving the kitchen. I stood there, amidst the scattered bags and jars, a slow burn rising within me. They treated me like a fragile old woman, blithely unaware of the truth. They thought they were protecting me, controlling me, when in reality, they were merely children playing at adulthood. I looked around my kitchen, at the gleaming appliances, the custom cabinets, the small luxuries I allowed myself. This house, like everything else I owned, was paid for in full, a testament to my and my husband's careful planning. They thought I was struggling. They had no idea. A small, almost imperceptible smile played on my lips. It was time they learned a lesson. It was time for a little re-education. I closed my eyes, picturing their upcoming family vacation to the coast, a vacation they had insisted on paying for, convinced I couldn't afford it myself. It was going to be a very interesting trip. I could almost taste the sweet revenge already. I opened the pantry, carefully placing the jar of olives on the shelf, next to the other luxuries they deemed me unworthy of. The game, my dear children, has just begun. Rain lashed against the kitchen window, blurring the view of my smaller garden. Honestly, Mom, this fridge is ancient, Michael said, his voice echoing my own thoughts from months ago when I'd first considered replacing it. He yanked open the door, peered inside, then wrinkled his nose, and his fate yogurt from last week. I felt a flush of heat rise in my cheeks. Yes, Michael, I replied calmly, though my hands tightened around my mug of tea. I haven't quite finished it yet. He sighed dramatically, closing the fridge with a thud that rattled the teacups in the cupboard. You need to be more careful with food, Mom. You could get sick. His tone dripped with a condescending concern that grated on my nerves. He'd been popping in more frequently lately, ostensibly to check on me, but his inspections felt more like audits. Last week, it was the faulty garden hose. The week before, the flickering hallway light bulb. I appreciate your concern, dear, I said, forcing a smile, but I manage perfectly well on my own. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. I just don't want you to struggle, he said, his gaze sweeping across the kitchen, lingering on the slightly chipped tile by the sink. Things break. Appliances wear out. It can get expensive. A muscle twitched in my jaw. Expensive. He thought I couldn't afford to maintain my own home, the home I'd shared with his father for over 40 years, the home I'd meticulously cared for, even as they were growing up, while juggling a part-time job to supplement our family income. They seemed to have forgotten, or perhaps never truly realized, the sacrifices I'd made to ensure they had a comfortable life. The investments I'd carefully nurtured over the years, the nest egg I'd built, quietly and steadily, preparing for the future. A future that apparently, in their eyes, now included them managing my life down to the expiration date on my yogurt. I assure you, Michael, I said, my voice even and steady, I'm aware of the costs involved in running a household. He raised an eyebrow, a skeptical look on his face. Are you sure? Because I noticed the garden fence needs repairing, and the guttering looks clogged. Winter's coming. You don't want any leaks. He seemed determined to find some failing, some area where he could insert himself and his perceived helpfulness. It was almost comical, almost. I'll take care of it, Michael, I repeated, a touch of steel creeping into my voice. He hesitated, then pushed off the counter. All right, Mom, but if you need anything, just call. The unspoken because you clearly can't handle it yourself hung heavy in the air. He pecked me on the cheek and headed for the door. As the sound of his car pulling away faded, I let out a slow, controlled breath. My hand drifted to the small, antique wooden box on the shelf above the kettle. Inside, nestled amongst old photographs and trinkets, was a key. Not to the house, not to the car, but to a safe deposit box. A safe deposit box that held not just documents, but the tangible proof of years of shrewd investments, of a financial security that far exceeded anything my children could imagine. They saw an aging woman in a slightly outdated kitchen, fretting over the cost of a new refrigerator. They saw someone in need of their assistance, their guidance, their control. They saw weakness where there was strength, vulnerability where there was resilience. They were so very, very wrong. A small smile played on my lips. I had a plan. It wouldn't be loud or confrontational. It wouldn't involve shouting matches or dramatic pronouncements. It would be subtle, quiet, almost imperceptible. But by the end, they would understand. They would understand the depth of their misjudgment, the extent of their folly. They would understand just how much they had underestimated their mother. I glanced at the calendar hanging by the back door. Emma and Julian were due to visit next weekend. Perfect. The timing couldn't be better. I picked up my phone and dialed a number. Hello, David. Yes, it's Rose. About that property in Tuscany, you think I'm ready to proceed with the purchase? The rain continued to drum against the window pane, a steady rhythm against the growing anticipation in my heart. Rain lashed against the windows, mimicking the relentless drizzle of Emma and Julian's well-meaning but suffocating advice. Mom, are you sure you need another carton of yogurt? The one in the fridge is still good. Emma peered into my shopping bag with a furrowed brow. Over the past few months, these little interrogations had become routine. Julian chimed in. Perhaps we should start a grocery list, Rose. It might help you stay within budget. He smiled, a tight, polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I forced a smile back. That's a thought, dear, but I think I can manage my own yogurt. I unpacked the groceries, acutely aware of their watchful gazes. Later that week, Michael called. Mom, the gardener mentioned the sprinkler system needs some work. Are you sure you want to spend the money on that right now? He paused, and I could almost hear him formulating his next sentence. Maybe we could look at some more cost-effective landscaping options. I sighed internally. Michael, the garden has always been important to me. I'll take care of the sprinklers. His tone softened slightly, but the underlying concern, or was it control, remained. All right, Mom. Just let me know if you need help with the finances. The pattern continued, day after day, week after week. Emma started organizing my cupboards. Just to make things easier for you, Mom, Julian offered to review my bank statements, to help you keep track of everything. Michael even suggested selling my late husband's vintage car. It's just sitting in the garage, Rose. You could really use that money. Every suggestion, every offer of help, felt like another chip off the block of my independence. They spoke to me as if I were a child, incapable of managing my own life, my own home, my own finances. I sat on the porch swing one evening, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, and a wave of loneliness washed over me. I missed my husband, his quiet strength, the way he never questioned my judgment. Now, it seemed, everyone was an expert on my life. Even the cashier at the supermarket offered unsolicited advice on cheaper brands of tea. This one's on special. Dearie, much better value for your money. I paid, a tight knot forming in my stomach. One Sunday, Emma and Julian arrived for their usual Sunday dinner. "Mom, we were thinking maybe we could help you downsize a little," Emma began, her voice carefully neutral. "This house is quite big for just one person. Perhaps a smaller apartment would be more manageable," Julian added, "and closer to us, of course. We could keep a better eye on you." I felt a flicker of anger, a spark of defiance ignite within me. I looked at them, really looked at them, and saw not concern, but a subtle, almost unconscious sense of entitlement. They assumed I was struggling, that I needed their help, their guidance, their control. They had no idea. I cleared my throat. "That's very thoughtful of you, dears, but I'm quite comfortable here." I smiled, a small, almost imperceptible smile. In fact, I was just thinking of redecorating. Perhaps a new sunroom overlooking the garden. Emma and Julian exchanged a look, a mixture of confusion and concern clouding their faces. "Redecorating," Emma repeated, her voice laced with disbelief. "But Mom, wouldn't that be expensive?" I simply smiled again, a little wider this time. "Don't worry, dears. I can manage." The conversation shifted, but the seed was planted. I saw the doubt in their eyes, the flicker of uncertainty. They were starting to question their assumptions. Good. Let them wonder. The following weeks were a subtle dance of veiled hints and calculated moves. I mentioned a financial advisor I was working with, someone who was helping me restructure my portfolio. I started receiving packages, new gardening tools, expensive art supplies, a top-of-the-line espresso machine, and casually dismissed them as investments. I overheard whispered conversations. "Where is she getting this money? Maybe she inherited something we don't know about." And a slow, creeping realization began to dawn on them. They started treating me differently, less like a fragile old woman and more like someone who held the purse strings. The questions about my grocery bills stopped. The offers to manage my finances evaporated. The suggestions to downsize vanished into thin air. They were still kind, still attentive, but the underlying current of control had shifted. They were waiting, watching, wondering, and I, for the first time in a long time, felt a sense of quiet power. The rain outside had stopped. The sun was breaking through the clouds, casting a warm glow on the garden. I sat on the porch swing, sipping my freshly brewed espresso, a small, secret smile playing on my lips. It was almost time. Rain lashed against the window pane, mirroring the tempest brewing inside me. I sat by the fire, the flickering flames doing little to warm the chill that had settled deep in my bones. Emma and Michael's well-intentioned but suffocating concern had become a constant presence in my life since their father's passing. "Mom, are you sure you can manage such a large house on your own?" Michael had asked just yesterday, his brow furrowed with worry. Perhaps downsizing would be a sensible option. He'd meant well, I knew, but the implications stung. As if I, after a lifetime of managing a household and raising a family, was suddenly incapable of handling my own affairs. "I'm perfectly capable, Michael," I'd replied, my voice tighter than I intended. He'd just patted my hand, that condescending little pat that spoke volumes. "Of course, Mom, we just want what's best for you." I stared into the flames, the events of the past few weeks replaying in my mind. The clipped coupons Emma had left on the kitchen counter, the pointed questions about my grocery bills, Julian's thinly veiled suggestions about selling some of my unused jewelry. "It's just sitting in a box, Rose," he'd said, flashing that charming smile that always seemed a little too practiced. "Why not put it to good use?" They thought I was struggling. They thought I was clinging to a lifestyle I could no longer afford. They pitied me. The thought brought a bitter taste to my mouth. Pity from my own children. They saw me as a fragile, fading woman, adrift in a sea of financial insecurity. They had no idea of the nest egg I'd carefully cultivated over the years, the investments I'd shrewdly made, the financial cushion that ensured my comfort and independence. Their father, bless his heart, had always handled the outward-facing finances, the bills and the day-to-day expenses. He'd enjoyed that role, the provider, the protector. I, in turn, had quietly managed my own portfolio, a secret garden of financial security that I'd never felt the need to reveal until now. A slow smile spread across my face, the chill in my bones beginning to thaw. They wanted to manage my finances. They wanted to dictate my lifestyle. Fine. Let them. Let them think they were in control. It would make the eventual revelation all the more satisfying. I wouldn't tell them outright, of course. That would be too easy, too blunt. No, this called for something more subtle, something that would make them question their assumptions, their preconceived notions about their supposedly struggling mother. I rose from my chair, a new energy coursing through my veins. The rain continued to batter the windows, but the sound no longer mirrored the turmoil within. Instead, it sounded like a drumbeat, a rhythm of anticipation for the plan taking shape in my mind. It was time to take back the reins, time to remind my children that their mother was far more capable, far more resourceful than they imagined. I walked over to the antique writing desk, a piece I'd inherited from my grandmother, and opened the drawer. Inside lay a small, leather-bound notebook, its pages filled with neatly written notes and figures. My secret ledger, a testament to my years of careful planning and prudent investment. I ran my fingers over the worn leather, a sense of quiet power settling over me. This little book held the key to their awakening, and I, their seemingly frail and vulnerable mother, held the key to it all. I began to jot down some ideas, small, seemingly insignificant changes that would slowly begin to chip away at their perception of my financial situation. A new gardener, perhaps. Someone to tame the overgrown rose bushes that Michael had been fretting over. "Mom, you really should get someone to help with the garden," he'd said, his voice tinged with exasperation. "It's getting out of hand." I demurred, citing the expense. Now, however, I thought a little professional landscaping might be just the thing. A subtle hint of unexpected expenditure. A tiny seed of doubt planted in their minds. And then there was the matter of the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom. Emma had insisted on calling a handyman, a budget-friendly one she'd found online. "We can't have you wasting money on expensive plumbers, Mom," she'd declared. I'd agreed, playing the part of the grateful, slightly overwhelmed widow. But now I thought I might call my usual plumber, the one who charged a premium but did impeccable work. Another subtle nudge, another crack in the facade of their carefully constructed narrative. I continued to write, the ideas flowing freely now. A new set of curtains for the living room, A weekend trip to the coast, small indulgences, carefully chosen to raise eyebrows and spark questions. I wouldn't be extravagant, not yet. The key was subtlety, a slow drip of inconsistencies that would erode their certainty, their conviction that they knew what was best for me. I closed the notebook, a small, satisfied smile playing on my lips. The rain had stopped, and a sliver of moon peeked through the clouds. It was a new beginning, a reclaiming of my autonomy, my independence. They thought they knew me. They thought they had me figured out. They had no idea. The game, my dear children, has just begun, and I, your supposedly helpless mother, hold all the cards. Rain lashed against the windows, mirroring the dreary ache in my chest. Weeks had bled into one another since Emma and Julian had taken over the grocery shopping, convinced I was incapable of managing a simple budget. "Mom, you bought spoiled yogurt last week," Emma had said, her voice laced with a condescending sweetness that stung more than any outright insult. "Let us handle this, for your own good." I let them condescendingly pat my hand. I let them dictate what went into my fridge, and I let the quiet resentment simmer beneath my surface like a low, steady flame. Each day, each carefully curated shopping list, each pointed comment about my supposed forgetfulness, fueled the slow burn. "These generic beans are just as good, Mom," Julian announced one afternoon, holding up a can as if presenting evidence in a courtroom. "And half the price." He glanced at Emma, a smug look exchanged between them. "We're just trying to help you stretch your money further." I managed a weak smile, my heart heavy. "Of course, dear," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. "Whatever you think is best." Later that evening, I sat alone in my den, a dusty photo album open in my lap. Pictures of my late husband, David, and I stared back at me, reminders of a life built on shared dreams and mutual respect. David had always trusted my judgment, both with our finances and our family. He knew, as my children seemed to have forgotten, that I was more than capable of handling my own affairs. The following week, Emma arrived with a stack of coupons, her brow furrowed in concentration as she flipped through them. "Look, Mom, 2 for 1 on pasta sauce. We can really stock up." I watched her, a strange sense of detachment washing over me. This wasn't about saving money. It was about control. It was about them asserting their perceived superiority, their belief that I was a fragile, helpless old woman. "That's wonderful, dear," I said, my voice flat. "You're such a good planner." A flicker of satisfaction crossed Emma's face. That night, I spent hours in David's old study, a room I rarely entered anymore. It was filled with his books, his papers, his presents. I opened his desk drawer, the familiar scent of cedar filling my nostrils. Inside, beneath a stack of old letters, was a small, leather-bound journal. I'd never seen it before. My fingers trembled as I opened it. The pages were filled with David's neat handwriting, detailing not just our finances, but his hopes and dreams for our future. And then I saw it, a separate section, marked for Rose in case of emergency. It outlined a series of investments, accounts, and properties I had no idea existed. The numbers swam before my eyes, forming a sum far beyond anything I had ever imagined. David had quietly, meticulously built a fortune, protecting it, growing it, and ultimately leaving it all for me. The revelation hit me like a tidal wave. The condescending smiles, the patronizing comments, the carefully curated grocery lists, it all seemed ludicrous now, a childish game played by those who knew nothing of the truth. A slow smile spread across my face. The resentment I had been harboring transformed into something else entirely, a quiet resolve. A sense of power I hadn't felt in a long time. I closed the journal, a plan beginning to form in my mind. I wouldn't confront them directly, not yet. I would let them continue their charade, their little performance of benevolent caretakers. I would gather more evidence of their control, let them dig their own hole a little deeper, and then, when the time was right, I would reveal the truth, not with a grand announcement, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a subtlety that would mirror their own condescending tactics. The next morning, Julian arrived early, a box of discount cereal in hand. "Mom, I found this new brand," he began, a lecturing tone in his voice. "It's much more affordable." He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes fixed on something behind me. I turned to see what had caught his attention. It was a small, framed photograph I had placed on the mantelpiece the night before. A photograph of David and me standing on the deck of our yacht in the Mediterranean, a place Emma and Julian believed I could no longer afford to visit. The photo was slightly faded, a relic from a happier time, but the memory it evoked was anything but faded. It was a memory of wealth, of freedom, of a life my children clearly underestimated. Julian's face paled slightly. He looked from the photo to me, his eyes wide with a dawning realization. "Mom," he stammered, when was this taken?" I smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Oh, a few years ago," I said casually, turning back to the stove, "before I supposedly lost my mind and my money." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken questions, and in that silence, I knew my plan was already beginning to unfold. Rain lashed against the windows, mirroring the storm brewing inside me. "Mom, are you sure you can afford these new gardening supplies?" Emma asked, her voice laced with that familiar condescending tone. I smiled faintly. "Darling, don't you worry your pretty little head about it." I continued potting the orchids, enjoying the rich scent of the damp earth. Julian, ever the dutiful fiancé, chimed in, "Perhaps we could help you budget better, Rose. We just want to make sure you're comfortable, especially after, well, you know." He trailed off and spoke in reference to my late husband hanging in the air. "That's very thoughtful of you, Julian," I replied, my voice even, "but I assure you, I'm managing just fine." I'd spent the last few weeks laying the groundwork. Small, subtle shifts, like the strategically placed brochures for luxury cruises on the coffee table, or the accidental mention of a friend's recent trip to a private island. Seeds of doubt, planted and watered with calculated precision. Today, I was ready to cultivate the first bloom. "Emma, dear, could you hand me that catalog from the side table?" I asked, gesturing towards the glossy brochure for a high-end landscaping company. She picked it up, her brow furrowing slightly. "Mom, this is extravagant. These designs are, well, they're rather ambitious, aren't they?" "Ambitious, yes," I agreed, carefully transferring a delicate orchid to a larger pot. but I think the garden deserves a little rejuvenation, don't you? It's been rather neglected lately." Julian cleared his throat. "Rose, perhaps we should discuss this further. We just want to ensure you're not overextending yourself financially." His tone was almost patronizing, as if speaking to a child. "Julian," I said, setting down the pot and turning to face him directly, "I appreciate your concern, truly, but my finances are my own affair." A flicker of surprise crossed his face. Emma, ever quick to follow his lead, added, "But Mom, we're family. We just want to help." "Help," I echoed, a touch of steel creeping into my voice. "Or control." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken tension. The rain continued its relentless assault on the windows. I broke the silence, my voice calm. "I've been meaning to show you both something." I led them to the study, a room they rarely entered, considering it my private space. I opened a drawer in my antique desk, revealing a stack of documents, not the jumbled receipts and bills they expected, but neatly organized investment portfolios. I spread them out on the desk, the crisp paper rustling in the quiet room. Emma's eyes widened. "Mom, what is all this? These, my dears," I said, my voice laced with a quiet triumph, "are just a small portion of my investments." Something I neglected to mention during our previous discussions about my finances. Julian, his composure finally cracking, stammered, But we thought you thought what?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "That I was struggling, that I couldn't afford a few new plants for my garden." I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, letting the weight of their assumptions settle upon them. Then I smiled. "Perhaps," I said, my voice regaining its gentle tone, "we should revisit the topic of the garden's redesign. I've had my eye on a rather lovely Italian fountain." Emma and Julian exchanged a look of stunned disbelief. I continued, my voice light and conversational. "I'm meeting with the landscapers tomorrow. Perhaps you'd both like to join me. We can discuss incorporating a koi pond as well. What do you think, Julian, Emma?" Their faces were a mixture of confusion and embarrassment. They had underestimated me, misjudged my situation entirely, and now I held all the cards. I picked up the landscaping catalog again, flipping through the pages, my gaze lingering on a particularly extravagant design. "Now about those imported rose bushes," I murmured, a small, satisfied smile playing on my lips. The storm outside raged on, but inside, a different kind of tempest had just begun to brew, one they wouldn't so easily weather. The antique clock in the hall chimed 4 times, a melodic counterpoint to the tension humming in the air. "Mother," Emma began, her voice tight, "Julian and I have been discussing the wedding arrangements, and well, we've had a slight change of plans." My heart sank. I knew what was coming. This was about the venue, the grand ballroom at the Crestwood Hotel, the one I'd offered to book for them. "We've decided to go with something a little smaller," Julian added, his gaze carefully avoiding mine. "More manageable, given the circumstances." "Circumstances," I echoed, feigning confusion. Emma exchanged a look with Julian, that look that implied I was somehow out of touch, a fragile bird they had to protect from the harsh realities of the world, primarily their world of perceived financial strain. "Well, yes, Mother," Emma said gently. We just don't want you to overextend yourself. Weddings are expensive, and we know you've been careful with your money lately." A bitter laugh almost escaped my lips. Careful. If only they knew. Years of prudent investments, of living well within my means, had built a financial fortress they couldn't even begin to imagine. But I let the misconception fester. "Of course, darling," I replied, my voice laced with manufactured disappointment. "I understand. Whatever makes you happy." The relief on their faces was almost comical. They babbled about the charming, rustic venue they'd found, its intimate atmosphere, its budget-friendly appeal. I listened patiently, nodding and murmuring agreement, all the while plotting my next move. Later that evening, I sat in my study, the soft glow of the Tiffany lamp illuminating the mahogany desk. This room, like so many things in my life, was a testament to my late husband's and my careful planning and quiet affluence. I pulled out a file, a thick document containing details of my investment portfolio. The numbers on the page danced before my eyes, a silent symphony of financial security. My children's misguided attempts to protect me from imaginary poverty had spurred me into action. It was time they learned the truth, but not outright. No, that wouldn't do. The reveal had to be subtle, a slow burn that would leave them speechless. The next morning, I casually mentioned to Emma that I was planning a small trip. Just a little getaway, I said vaguely. Somewhere warm. Her eyes widened. "Mother, are you sure you can afford that?" she asked, her concern palpable. "Oh, I think I can manage," I replied with a small smile. "I've been meaning to use some of those travel points I've accumulated." It was a small lie, a harmless fib, but it served its purpose. It reinforced their belief in my limited means. Days turned into weeks, and my small trip became a subject of hushed whispers between Emma and Michael. I could feel their curiosity, their apprehension. Where was I going? How could I possibly afford it? The charade continued. Postcards arrived from exotic locales, carefully curated to hint at modest, budget-friendly travel. Pictures of bustling markets, charming local cafes, nothing that screamed luxury, but the seeds of doubt had been planted. Then the day of the rustic wedding arrived. The venue was, as described, charming, if a little cramped. As I watched Emma and Julian exchange vows, a small part of me felt a pang of sadness. They were good children, just misguided. After the ceremony, I quietly slipped away and noticed amidst the flurry of congratulations and well wishes, I drove to the airport, a small, satisfied smile playing on my lips. My actual destination, the Maldives. A private villa on a secluded island awaited me, a stark contrast to the budget-friendly accommodations I'd led them to believe. As I sipped champagne on my private deck, overlooking the turquoise ocean, I imagined their faces when they received the postcard. A simple image of a breathtaking sunset, captioned, "Enjoying a little post-wedding relaxation, wishing you all the best." It wouldn't be a blatant revelation, not yet, but it was a start, a subtle shift in the narrative, the beginning of their understanding, their slow realization that their mother wasn't the fragile, financially strapped woman they thought she was. The Maldives were just the first step. There were other trips planned, other subtle reveals waiting to unfold. They would learn in time. the true extent of their misjudgment, and I, in my own quiet way, would have my revenge. Rain lashed against the windows of my sunroom, a stark contrast to the warmth radiating from the fireplace. Emma and Julian were due any minute, and I'd laid out a spread of tea and pastries, the good china gleaming under the soft lamplight. I smoothed down the tablecloth, a small smile playing on my lips. They'll be surprised, I murmured to myself, adjusting a silver sugar bowl. The doorbell chimed, a melodic counterpoint to the drumming rain. "Coming," I called, my voice holding a note of anticipation. Emma swept in, Julian trailing slightly behind, shaking the rain from his coat. "Mother, what a downpour!" she exclaimed, her voice tinged with the familiar blend of concern and mild exasperation. We almost rescheduled. Julian, ever polite, offered a warm smile. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Peterson. It's cozy in here." "Nonsense, dear," I replied, ushering them towards the comfortable armchairs near the fireplace. "A little rain never hurt anyone. Please sit down. I have some lovely Darjeeling." Emma hesitated, her gaze flickering over the china. "Mother, are you sure? This is the good china, of course, dear," I said smoothly, pouring the steaming tea. "What's the point of having nice things if you don't use them?" I offered a plate of pastries, noticing Emma's eyes widen slightly. "These are from that little French bakery downtown, the one you said was too expensive." Emma's cheeks flushed a delicate pink. "Mother, I just meant well. You know budgeting is important." Julian, ever the diplomat, stepped in. "These look delicious, Mrs. Peterson." "Thank you." He took a bite, his eyes widening in genuine appreciation. "These are incredible." The afternoon unfolded pleasantly, the tension that had hung in the air for months gradually dissipating. We talked about their upcoming wedding, about Julian's work, about the changing seasons. There was a lightness in the conversation, a sense of ease I hadn't felt in a long time. As the rain subsided and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the room, Emma cleared her throat. "Mother, there's something we wanted to discuss." "Oh," I inquired, feigning innocence. Emma exchanged a glance with Julian. "We've been thinking," she began hesitantly, "about the house. It's quite large for you to manage on your own. And with the upkeep, yes." Julian added gently, "Perhaps downsizing would be a sensible option." He glanced around the sunroom, his gaze lingering on the antique furniture and the original artwork adorning the walls. I took a sip of my tea, setting the delicate cup down on its saucer with a gentle clink. "Downsizing," I repeated, my voice soft. "That's an interesting idea, but I rather like my house." Of course," Emma said quickly, "but perhaps something smaller, more manageable, something less expensive to maintain." I smiled. "You're worried about my finances, aren't you?" Emma's face colored again. "We just want what's best for you, Mother." "I know, dear," I said, reaching for a small, intricately carved wooden box on the side table. It was a box I'd kept hidden for years, a box that held the key to a truth they had long forgotten. I opened the box, revealing a stack of documents, neatly bound with a silk ribbon. "What's that?" Emma asked, her curiosity piqued. "Just a few things," I replied, handing her the top document. It was a statement from my investment portfolio, a portfolio they knew nothing about. a portfolio that held more than enough to maintain this house, and a dozen more besides. Emma's eyes widened as she scanned the figures, her mouth forming a silent "oh." Julian peered over her shoulder, his expression mirroring her astonishment. "Mother, this is," he stammered, "considerable." I finished for him, a quiet smile playing on my lips. "I've been managing my own finances quite well, thank you." In fact, I continued, retrieving another document from the box, "I've recently made some acquisitions." I handed Emma a deed, the address clearly printed at the top, the address of the very French bakery she deemed too expensive. Emma's face was a mixture of shock and bewilderment. You bought the bakery, indeed," I said, taking another sip of my tea. I thought it might be nice to have fresh croissants delivered every morning. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken words, with the weight of their assumptions, with the realization of their misjudgment. I watched them, a quiet sense of satisfaction settling within me. The rain had stopped, and the setting sun painted the sky in hues of pink and gold, a fitting backdrop to this quiet, subtle victory. "So," I said, breaking the silence, "about that downsizing, perhaps we should discuss your wedding plans instead." Emma and Julian exchanged another glance, this one filled with a newfound respect, a hint of awe, and perhaps, just perhaps, a touch of healthy fear. The game, it seemed, had changed, and I was finally holding all the cards. I poured myself another cup of tea, the fine china warming my hand, the aroma filling the air with a sense of peace. There was still the matter of Michael and the condescending way he'd taken over the garden maintenance. But that, I decided, was a story for another day. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Gerald, ever the early riser, was already at the table, hunched over a stack of papers, a steaming mug of coffee beside him. "Morning, love," he said, without looking up. "Take a look at these projections." I poured myself a cup of coffee and joined him, pulling a chair close. The papers were filled with dense figures and graphs, detailing the performance of some of our investments. "This is exciting, Gerald," I said, running a finger down a column of steadily rising numbers. "But it's all so long-term," he chuckled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Patience, Rose. Patience is the key." He pointed to a particular graph, a line steadily climbing upwards over a span of decades. "See this? This is where we'll be in 30, 40 years. It's not about instant gratification, Rose. It's about building something that will last, something that will protect us and our future." I nodded, taking in the implications. We had started with so little, just his teacher's salary, and my part-time work at the library. Every penny we saved felt precious, a small victory in the face of mounting bills and unexpected expenses. "I know," I replied, "but it's hard sometimes, not seeing the immediate results." He reached across the table and took my hand. "Think of it like planting a tree, Rose. You nurture it, you water it, you protect it from the storms. You don't see the fruit right away, but you know it's coming, and when it does, it will be all the sweeter for the wait." He squeezed my hand gently. "We're planting a whole orchard, Rose, an orchard that will bear fruit for generations to come." His words resonated deeply with me. I had always been a planner, a saver. I understood the value of delayed gratification, even if it sometimes felt difficult to resist the allure of immediate purchases. You're right, Gerald, I said, a smile spreading across my face. An orchard. I like that. We spent the rest of that morning discussing our financial goals, meticulously poring over spreadsheets and investment reports. We talked about the future, about our dreams for ourselves, for our children. We didn't want them to struggle the way we had in our early years. We wanted to provide them with a safety net, a foundation upon which they could build their own lives. They won't need to worry about money, Rose, Gerald said with quiet conviction. They'll be free to pursue their passions, to follow their dreams. The memory fades, the sunlight in that old kitchen replaced by the cool, clinical light of my current living room. Emma and Julian are sitting on the sofa, discussing their upcoming wedding plans with a thinly veiled air of condescension. Mom, Emma begins, her tone laced with that familiar mix of concern and impatience. We're just a little worried about the costs. Weddings can be expensive. And with your situation, she trails off, leaving the unspoken implication hanging in the air. Julian nods in agreement, his smile tight. We just want to make sure you're comfortable, Rose. We wouldn't want you to overextend yourself. Overextend myself. The irony isn't lost on me. They think I'm struggling, that I'm on the verge of financial ruin. They think I need their help, their guidance, their protection. They have no idea about the orchard, the decades of careful planning and investment that Gerald and I painstakingly cultivated. They see a widowed, aging woman living in a modest home, clipping coupons and worrying about grocery bills. They don't see the wealth, the security, the freedom that lies just beneath the surface. Don't worry, dears, I say, my voice calm and steady. I've been saving for this. Their eyes widen slightly, a flicker of surprise in their expressions. Oh, Mom, Emma says, her voice softening a little. That's so thoughtful of you. But are you sure you can afford it? We can scale things back if needed. We don't want you to feel burdened. I smile. No, it's truly my pleasure. I want you to have the wedding of your dreams. Consider it a gift. Julian clears his throat. That's very generous of you, Rose. We appreciate it. I meet his gaze, a quiet amusement dancing in my eyes. Think of it, I say, my voice barely above a whisper, as a small harvest from the orchard. A puzzled look crosses Emma's face. Orchard, she asks, her brow furrowed. I simply smile and shake my head. It's just an expression, dear. The conversation moves on to other details. The venue, the guest list, the flowers. I listen patiently, offering suggestions and advice when asked, but mostly observing, taking in their assumptions and their subtle attempts to control the narrative. They still believe they are in charge, that they are the ones holding the purse strings. They have no idea that the ground they stand on, the very foundation of their perceived security, is built upon a legacy they know nothing about. The orchard. It's more than just a metaphor. It's a testament to a lifetime of hard work, of careful planning, of shared dreams, and unwavering faith in the future. It's a secret I've kept close, a silent power I've nurtured for decades. And now, finally, it's time to share the fruits of my labor. Not all at once, of course. That would be too much, too overwhelming. No, This will be a slow reveal, a gradual unveiling of the truth, a subtle, satisfying revenge, served one delicious bite at a time. Christmas morning sunlight streamed through the bay window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I sipped my coffee, the warmth spreading through me, a stark contrast to the chill I'd felt for months. "It's a beautiful day, isn't it?" I asked, directing my words towards the framed photograph of my late husband, Richard, on the mantelpiece. He'd have loved this. The whole family gathered, the house bustling. He'd have been carving the turkey with that goofy grin of his, making terrible jokes that somehow always made everyone laugh. This year, however, the laughter felt hollow, strained. Emma and Julian, along with Michael and his wife, Sarah, were chattering away in the kitchen, their voices a low hum punctuated by the occasional clink of silverware. They were probably discussing the latest frugal finds Sarah had unearthed, or perhaps Michael was detailing his plans for my garden, plans he'd made without consulting me. I closed my eyes for a moment, the memory of Emma's condescending tone still fresh in my mind. "Mom," she'd said, "just a few weeks ago, we're just worried about you. That grocery bill, $100, that's just excessive." She'd peered at the receipt as if it were a contaminated object. Julian had chimed in. "Perhaps we could help you with meal planning, Mrs. Peterson. We just want to make sure you're being sensible." Sensible? The word grated on me. I'd managed a household, a family, and a successful career for decades, and now my own children treated me like a child myself. But things were different now. The quiet resolve I'd cultivated over these past months, the meticulous planning, the subtle shifts in my behavior, all of it was about to culminate today. This Christmas morning would be more than just the unwrapping of presents. It would be the unwrapping of a truth they had so readily dismissed. The aroma of roasting turkey wafted into the living room, and soon the entire family was gathered around the dining table. The usual Christmas pleasantries were exchanged, forced and brittle. "Lovely tablecloth, Mom," Emma said, her eyes darting to a small, almost imperceptible stain near the edge. I smiled. "Thank you, dear. It's an old one. An antique, actually, worth more than their combined monthly salaries. But they didn't need to know that. Not yet." After the meal, the gift-giving commenced. I'd watched their faces carefully as they opened my gifts. Practical, sensible gifts. A new set of kitchen knives for Emma and Julian, a how-to book on home maintenance for Michael. Their expressions were a mixture of polite gratitude and thinly veiled disappointment. They expected something less thoughtful, less valuable, less indicative of someone who, in their minds, was struggling financially. "Mom," Michael began, clearing his throat, "about those repairs you mentioned, the leaky faucet, the peeling paint." He trailed off, fidgeting with the book I'd given him. "We were thinking, maybe we could pool our resources and get a contractor in. Someone affordable." He avoided my gaze. This was it, my moment. I took a deep breath. "That's very kind of you, Michael," I said, my voice steady. "But it won't be necessary." A puzzled silence fell over the room. Emma frowned. "But Mom, the house needs." I raised my hand, silencing her. "The house," I said, my voice gaining strength, "is perfectly fine. In fact, I've already had it assessed. Julian shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Assessed. He echoed. Yes, I replied, reaching into the pocket of my cardigan. For insurance purposes, of course. I pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. The appraiser was quite impressed with the renovations. Their eyes were fixed on the paper in my hand. I unfolded it slowly, savoring the moment. It wasn't an insurance assessment. It was a valuation report. A valuation report for a house that had tripled in value thanks to the extensive, secret renovations I'd commissioned over the past 6 months. Renovations they'd been blissfully unaware of, too busy monitoring my grocery bills and planning my garden. The estimated value, I announced, my voice clear and ringing, is just over $2 million. The silence that followed was deafening. Their faces, previously filled with condescending concern, were now slack with shock. Emma's jaw dropped. Julian's eyes widened. Michael stared at me, speechless. I smiled, a genuine smile this time. Now, I said, rising from my chair, who wants some more coffee? I walked towards the kitchen, leaving them to grapple with the revelation, the realization that their careful management, their well-meaning interference, had been utterly unnecessary. I hadn't needed their help. I'd been playing them all along. And the best part, this was only the beginning. I had a portfolio of investments, a Swiss bank account, and a whole lot of other secrets they hadn't even begun to imagine. Christmas this year was just a small gift, a preview of the independence, the control, the life I was reclaiming. And they had just received the most valuable lesson of all: never underestimate your mother.